BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. In this episode, I'm going to be responding to the episode Let's Crack the Zodiac from David Orenchak, that's episode number 19, talking about the book, The Zodiac Killer, A Brief Investigation by Prash Ganadrin, and responding to your questions and comments, of course. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And a lot of focus is still on the prime suspect, Arthur Lee Allen. And we have something here from Vincent McConnell, who has shared a lot of things for Black Box Online Radio. Thank you to Vincent for all of his hard work. And he has the CGI composite of Arthur Lee Allen and the Presidio Heights San Francisco Police Department sketch from the Stein shooting. The Stein shooting, of course, was the Zodiac Killer's final crime. And Vincent has written, I must say that this has zero evidentiary value of any kind. What it does demonstrate, however, is what Arthur Lee Allen would look like with a widow's peak and a wig and horn-rimmed glasses as a disguise. It is notable to point out that the letters following the Stein shooting declared the application as a disguise. The disguise was a component of which the author would not reveal. Could it have been a wig? I have speculated that the Presidio Heights sketch does not at all represent the Zodiac's appearance, for many reasons, but the relevant one is that the first sketch was amended to portray a heavier-set individual. For the life of me, I cannot understand how the second Presidio Heights sketch portrays a heavier individual. Yes, and when you look at any of the Presidio Heights sketches, it does not appear that the person has gained or lost any weight, or one looks bigger or smaller than the other. There is the first sketch, and then there's the amended sketch. And even if you look at the wanted poster of the Zodiac Killer, there are two different variations of the composite, but both of them look extremely similar in terms of weight, age, all of that. Older, sure. I mean, I'm not even convinced about that, but that's what it says in Vincent's post. Older, sure, but definitely not heavier, since every witness to the man's appearance said that the man they saw was heavier than the first Presidio Heights sketch, and also the second, in my opinion. But what if we blow up the facial features a bit to get a heavier and rounder face? Might that be what the killer looked like? And this, of course, would be Arthur Lee Allen wearing some type of disguise. Now, Arthur Lee Allen is the most widely discussed Zodiac Killer suspect, and he is also someone whom some people think should be ruled out, and other people think that he was the killer. But he definitely does not match the Presidio Heights sketch at all. And this is something that I thought about very early on in the Zodiac Killer investigations, because number one, Arthur Lee Allen was balding. Vincent asked a question, did he disguise his appearance with a wig? He would have had to. I mean, it would be almost impossible if he were not wearing a wig, because multiple people claim to have seen the Zodiac Killer after the murder of Paul Stein, and he has a full head of hair. He had a receding hairline, but he had a full head of hair nonetheless. It would have had to have been some type of crew cut wig. Also, after the Blue Rock Springs shooting, Mike Mageau reported that he saw a man who had reddish-brown curls in his hair. Arthur Lee Allen was balding. Cecilia Shepard saw the Zodiac Killer at Lake Berryessa before he put his mask on, and he was reported to have had a full head of brown hair. Either Arthur Lee Allen was wearing wigs, or he was not the Zodiac Killer. Now, I mean, I also think that this is something that we have to be critical of, and I've always been critical of this. I even talked about this in the debunking series that I did back in 2021 when I said that if you're going to have Arthur Lee Allen as your suspect, you have to start making either assumptions or trying to provide these types of explanations as to why the pieces don't fit. Most notably, that Arthur Lee Allen doesn't match the witness descriptions. He doesn't match the composites. Now, in terms of height and weight, sure, Arthur Lee Allen was 6 feet tall, and he was a little over 200 pounds, and the Zodiac Killer was reported to be 6 feet tall by at least one witness, and definitely around 200 pounds or slightly over 200 pounds from the other witnesses. But I really do have to thank Vincent for sharing this, because this is something that's also discussed in Robert Graysmith's book, when he believes that it should be exactly this, that the Zodiac Killer's composite sketches should have been drawn to portray a heavier man. But Lindsay Robbins, one of the eyewitnesses that contributed to the Zodiac Killer's composite sketches, was given photos of Arthur Lee Allen, and according to Mike Rodelli, who wrote about this in his book, Lindsay Robbins laughed at them, saying just sort of like, absolutely not. So you really have to decide whom are you going to listen to, which witnesses do you want to hear more loudly. And thank you to Vincent once again. And I would like to remind you guys that this episode of Zodiac Monday is brought to you by Capital One. If you sign up for the Capital One Quicksilver, you will get a $200 sign-on bonus. It's like getting free money, and you can click the link down below or the one in the description box. Now, I told you guys that I just read the book, The Zodiac Killer, A Brief Investigation by Prash Ganadrin, and that book is one that I didn't recognize the name of the author, but as soon as I started reading it, I remembered some things very clearly because it states that it's connected to the YouTube channel Prash's Murder Map. And then I thought, oh yes, I've seen videos from there from time to time. Even some things on Facebook are connected to Prash's Murder Map. And Prash has a Zodiac Killer book out called The Zodiac Killer, A Brief Investigation. And I have to be critical of a lot of these Zodiac Killer books that come out because I was just talking to you guys about On the Trail of the Zodiac Killer by Francis J. Armstrong, and I said that that book just had 85% of its content devoted to summarizing the facts of the case. Now, this book, The Zodiac Killer, A Brief Investigation, does not do it that intensely, not that extremely. There's about 50% of the book devoted to just summarizing the facts of the case, and if you are familiar with the facts of the Zodiac Killer mystery, you can kind of just glaze over those because it's going to be talking about things such as the Zodiac Killer committed his first confirmed murders on December 20th of 1968, with the murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. Then there's the Blue Rock Springs shooting where Darlene Ferrin was murdered, the Lake Berryessa stabbing where Cecilia Shepard was murdered, and then there is the murder of Paul Stein, which we've been discussing on October 11th of 1969. But with Prash's Zodiac Killer book, he has a section that is dedicated to analysis. It's maybe one chapter in the book is called Analysis, and that's what I would like to discuss with you guys, because he's going to be going about this in a very different direction. And, I mean, he takes it in a very simple manner. He explores the content in a simple manner, and I think there's something valuable for that. Firstly, how and why did the Zodiac Killer come to be? Prash has put forward the theory that really just gets to the bare bones of Zodiac hypothesizing, saying that the Zodiac talked about some things in his first cipher, the 408 cipher, that come from The Most Dangerous Game, the story of hunting people for sport. And really, it's just as simple as that. The Zodiac took inspiration from that, and that's one of the reasons why he wanted to be a real-life serial killer that was going to hunt people for sport. Number 2, the Zodiac Killer was inspired by the film Charlie Chan at Treasure Island, which has a fictional serial killer named Dr. Zodiac. And it's not only that. It's also that if you watch that movie, the killer is at first referred to as Zodiac, and then they learn later on that his name is actually Dr. Zodiac, but in the first introductory scenes, he's referred to as Zodiac. So that's the second inspiration. And the third, and this is what I found to be very interesting, was that he's talking about how the Zodiac was most likely inspired by fortune-telling machines. Now, Prash is not the first person to bring this up, but this is the first time that I've talked to you guys about this here on Black Box Online Radio Zodiac Monday, and that is that the Zodiac could have taken inspiration from the Zoltan fortune-telling machine. Now, it uses two different names, and I've been reading about this online a little bit. It uses the two names Zoltan and Zoltar. I think when I experienced them as a kid, they were referred to as Zoltar, but what it is that there are sometimes an animatronic fortune teller that will say something like, "Greetings from Zoltan," or "This is Zoltan speaking." And sometimes it's not even animatronic, just a card will drop out. You put in 25 cents into the fortune-telling machine, and a card will drop out. But you choose your fortune by putting in your zodiac sign. So someone would put in 25 cents, maybe if your zodiac sign is Pisces or something like that, You would push that button, and then you would either get your fortune spoken to you from the Zoltan machine, or it would drop the card. So you have, this is Zoltan speaking, Zodiac signs. And that was more or less the nutshell version of how Prash presented his case on how the Zodiac created the persona. And there are countless other possible inspirations. The story Sign Z by Edwin Baird that has the serial killer named Z who says this is Z calling after he commits the murders. And you also have the movie Shock Corridor from the early 1960s. What was that, 1963? That features somebody wearing the circle with the cross on his chest in a hooded costume that says he does it to be invisible. It makes him invisible as part of the Invisible Empire. So there could be other inspirations, but those weren't the ones that Prash focused on in the Zodiac Killer, A Brief Investigation. And I'm just looking at this stuff and I'm thinking, wow, what a simple case that has been put forward for the creation of the Zodiac Killer persona. He's really only identifying three major inspirations for the creation of the Zodiac Killer, and the Zoltan fortune-telling machine, I think, is a very strong point. I mean, it has esoteric Zodiac language. It even uses the name Zodiac, and you could see very easily about how someone would kind of shift things around and rethink things in a different way. But I said there's an entire chapter that's devoted to analysis. Here are some other analytical statements that are discussed in Prash's Zodiac Killer book. Number 1, the Zodiac Killer was an excellent marksman. Michael Butterfield of ZodiacKillerFacts.com has written an entire post where he just tries to dispel this notion that the Zodiac Killer was an excellent marksman, and overall, I tend to agree with the latter, that the Zodiac was not an excellent marksman, because when you look at the Zodiac's activities at Lake Herman Road, he was in very close proximity to the victims, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, let alone multiple shots were fired, and he's shooting in the dark. And I have to give a shout out to Dennis D., who simply said that, I mean, he tested out the Zodiac Killer's method. The Zodiac Killer wrote in a letter that the reason why he was able to shoot the victims at Lake Herman Road was he was carrying a .22 caliber firearm, and he taped a pencil flashlight to the gun, and when the flashlight is on the gun barrel, you have to aim at the center of the light cone and it will shoot accurately. And I mean, I even shared the video once on a previous Zodiac Monday. That method does indeed work. I mean, Dennis tested it out and it does indeed work. So that's just a very simple method that somebody is using, once again, to shoot victims in close proximity. And the Zodiac had to fire multiple times at Betty Lou Jensen. David Faraday was shot at point-blank range. At Blue Rock Springs, Mike Mageau is sprayed with bullets. He is shot numerous times, and he still survived. And Paul Stein, the final victim, the taxi driver, was shot in the head, again, at close range, point-blank range. The gun was pressed against his head. So I really don't think there's any evidence that the Zodiac was an excellent marksman. Point number 2 that was shared in Prash's book, The Zodiac Killer, A Brief Investigation. Prash states that the Zodiac Killer was known to have a gun collection. And I don't mean to be overly harsh or anything, but absolutely not. The only evidence I see is that the Zodiac definitively carried 3 different firearms. And, I mean, a different firearm was used after each of the crimes, and it's possible that the Zodiac was carrying a different firearm at Lake Berryessa. He never committed a shooting with a .45 caliber firearm, but Brian Hartnell was the surviving victim of the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and when he was shown different photos of guns and asked to identify the gun that the Zodiac was carrying, but not using, mind you, the Zodiac didn't fire any bullets from it, he identified a .45 caliber firearm. So 4 Zodiac Killer crime scenes, 4 different firearms are used. Now, it is entirely possible that Prash is completely right and the Zodiac was a firearms enthusiast and he owned numerous guns. I mean, I've even thought about that from time to time, but that is just a little bit of an educated guess. In all seriousness, I don't think there's any evidence that the Zodiac owned more than 4 guns, unless you're going to be tying in some type of unconfirmed Zodiac activity. But in all seriousness, I think that there's insufficient evidence to support that. And the final point that I will share with you from Prash's book, The Zodiac Killer, A Brief Investigation, is when Prash actually takes a very strong stance and is critical of document examiners. And this is almost a 180 in terms of the analytical statements that are discussed in the book, because first it's talking all about how, okay, this is how the Zodiac Killer could have created the persona. Second, these are some things about Prash's amateur attempt to profile the Zodiac Killer, and I encourage amateur attempts all the time. And then you have some things about how handwriting experts are not very good at what they do. And I was like, wow, I give him full credit for taking a bold stance on something and providing explanations and reasons why he thinks that. So why would handwriting experts who are examining the Zodiac Killer's letters not have a lot of credibility? What's discussed in the book, The Zodiac Killer, A Brief Investigation, is that all of the methods that are used by handwriting experts to try and match authentic Zodiac letters to inauthentic Zodiac letters are using methods that are not 100% accurate. Handwriting analysis is interpretive, it is subjective, and it's not an exact science. And I'm trying to paraphrase Prash's explanations from the book, mind you, but I do think he's mostly going down the right track. But this is a very, very strong line from the book when he says that handwriting experts are perhaps no better at analyzing handwriting than the amateurs. And I was like, wow, once again, I give credit to someone for being bold, and I'm not necessarily sure if I would go to that extreme length, just saying that handwriting experts are no better at analyzing handwriting than the amateurs. But this will become very important because a lot of people are building their entire cases for their Zodiac Killer suspects around handwriting, most notably Jack Torrance, who is the suspect of Dennis Kaufman, who has since passed away, but that's exactly what Dennis Kaufman did. He got a handwriting expert to look at the samples of handwriting that he had provided from his Zodiac Killer suspect, his stepfather, and that person agreed that these were the same writing, that the writing of Jack Torrance matched that of the Zodiac Killer. Some guy like Prash is just going to dismiss that completely and saying that really isn't very accurate. It's not an effective way to link somebody to the case. Now, here is a supporting point in Prash's favor, going well beyond Jack Torrance. What about the book The End of the Zodiac Killer Mystery by Michael Wachsel that talks all about what handwriting analysis used to solve the case? It is the companion book to a more famous one called The Most Dangerous Animal of All by Gary Stewart and Susan Mustafa. And they're talking about how Michael Wachsel is a handwriting expert who has analyzed the Zodiac Killer mystery, and he has determined that the handwriting was matched not to Gary Stewart's suspect, Earl Van Best Jr., but rather to the person who performed his illegal wedding to a 14-year-old girl named Judith Chandler. So the priest who signed the marriage certificate had handwriting that matched the Zodiac Killer, and I absolutely think that Michael Wachsel has no credibility at all, but that's more or less what Prash is talking about. And with Michael Wachsel, though, it's quite possible that he just blatantly lied. Possible. I mean, that's coming from me. But this whole concept of, we have somebody like Sherwood Morrill examining the Bates Had to Die letters, the 3 letters that came after the murder of Sherry Jo Bates in 1966, and determining that they were from the Zodiac Killer. But then in 2016, some person admitted to fabricating those letters as a hoax, saying that he was a troubled teenager at the time, 50 years earlier. And this is stuff that not everyone is in agreement on. But on a personal level, I believe that that prankster was telling the truth. I believe that that person genuinely hoaxed and fabricated the Bates Had to Die letters. That does not mean anything else in the Bates mystery, such as the Riverside confession and the desktop poem, but he admitted to fabricating the Bates Had to Die letters that came out in the spring of 1967. And you have a handwriting expert, maybe the top handwriting expert in Zodiac history, saying that, yeah, they're from the killer. And then you get contradictory evidence. And this is all coming back to that statement that was made by Prash when he's just saying that this type of analysis is not reliable. So that's where I'm going to leave it from on that note. But there's a final point that I want to discuss with you guys from Prash's book, The Zodiac Killer, A Brief Investigation. And it's talking about just that, the murder of Sherry Jo Bates from 1966. Now, it seems like Prash is not completely convinced that the Zodiac Killer committed that crime. Sherry Jo Bates was murdered on October 30th of that year. She was leaving the Riverside City College Library at night, and she was stabbed numerous times. What Prash is talking about is something that has been shared on ZodiacCiphers.com by Richard Grinnell when he just asked the question, if the Zodiac Killer tried to announce to the entire world in 1968 and 69 that he was responsible for homicides, the Lake Herman Road murders, the Blue Rock Springs shooting, the Blake Berryessa stabbing and the Stein murder, why didn't he announce the murder of Sherry Jo Bates? I've even said this on Black Box Online Radio. If you look at the corridor at Lake Berryessa and the dates of Zodiac activity are listed off, the Zodiac is drawing the Zodiac symbol, he wrote the word Vallejo, and then he listed the crimes that he had committed. But why didn't he include the murder of Sherry Jo Bates on the corridor at Lake Berryessa if he were indeed the killer? And these questions are things that Prash is trying to answer in the book, The Zodiac Killer, A Brief Investigation, when he's talking about how this is also just asked as a question, what if the Zodiac Killer did indeed know Sherry Jo Bates, and that was his first homicide, that she was someone whom he knew personally, and he murdered her. And he's not looking at the angle that it was an ex-lover like Bob Barnett or somebody like that, but what if it could have been the Zodiac Killer, and he didn't want to reveal anything specifically about Sherry Jo Bates in the Zodiac letters because he thought that that murder could have been tied back to him. And Prash openly admits it, that psychological profilers are going to be talking about how if a crime is committed by knife, then there's a higher chance that the victim was known personally to the killer, because they're almost viewing the knife as an extension of the human body where they can stab the person and they're actually going to feel all of the stab wounds. And it's definitely done in more of a personal, almost sometimes revenge-oriented murder. That begs a lot of questions about Lake Berryessa, but that's just something that Prash is asking in the book, and I do think that that is a good way of tying everything together, and Prash seems like somewhat of a smart guy. I'm definitely not convinced that the Zodiac actually murdered Sherry Jo Bates, but it's something that I've wondered for a long time. Why not just provide the evidence? The Zodiac Killer is somebody who mailed in pieces of Paul Stein's bloody shirt to prove that he committed the crimes. The Zodiac is somebody who stated facts that only he and the police knew to prove that he committed the crimes. Why not just do that with Riverside and saying, oh yeah, you guys never caught me for the 1966 murder of Sherry Jo Bates. All the Zodiac Killer said was, I give you credit for stumbling upon my Riverside activity, but you're only getting the easy ones. There are a hell of a lot more down there. Why didn't he prove that he committed the crimes? Maybe he was in Sherry Jo Bates' social circle, or a classmate, or somebody whom she knew personally, and he didn't want to reveal everything. He didn't want to give everything away, because then it could easily be tied back to him. They would start investigating people who were in her social circle that were her classmates more closely, and then he might actually be caught. So I give Prash an A for effort, even though I'm not 100% convinced. And once again, the title of the book is The Zodiac Killer, A Brief Investigation. And right now, I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. You can support this channel at BuyMeACoffee.com. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNid88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shoutout on Zodiac Monday. And if you do make a donation this week, and for the coming weeks, everything, I repeat, everything will be spent on true crime books to talk to you guys about, because I don't only do the Zodiac Killer segment on Mondays. On Wednesday, I do a segment about Jack the Ripper, and I've also added the Cooper Friday segment, where I'm going to be talking to you guys all about D.B. Cooper, who was responsible for the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. history. And firstly, I would like to give a shout out to Batman66. Thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. And Batman66 has also been helping out a lot with the YouTube Shorts. And the YouTube Shorts have now returned for Black Box Online Radio. Most likely they won't be coming out 7 days a week like they did before, but they will be coming out 5 days a week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Knock on wood and rich with possibility. And that's what I'm aiming for, so I'm going to try my best to keep turning those out, because there are just so many stories that I'm examining, because I'm just a true crime follower like anybody else, and the YouTube Shorts have become a way where I can share my responses to a lot of these stories. And those are coming out not only on YouTube, but also on Facebook and Instagram. And if you want to follow all of these true crime discussions, you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Thank you once again to Batman66. And the next shout out goes to River Prawn Pottery. Thank you again for your regular and consistent support. You two have been absolutely amazing when it comes to supporting Black Box Online Radio. And the next one comes to us on BuyMeACoffee.com from DNA King. DNA King, thank you so much for reaching out and talking about how you want to become a regular supporter of Black Box Online Radio as well. And you can see DNA and the King in the comments section providing a lot of good insights and commentary in his own right, much appreciated. And finally, I would like to give a shout out to Dennis G, who has been sharing a lot of images for Black Box Online Radio, finding a lot of the pictures that you're seeing going by on the screen. And I can't thank you guys enough for all the efforts that have been put in to help Black Box Online Radio just get bigger. And also, on the weekends, I've been releasing segments in the White Horse Killer saga. The first book was Killer on a White Horse, a story of the Evening Watchman, and I've been releasing them in audiobook format, and now the final segment has been released. It's not the end of the White Horse Killer saga, it's just the first book was Killer on a White Horse, a story of the Evening Watchman, the second story was called The Barry Albert Tapes, and the third one was called White Horse Strong. And the final segment of White Horse Strong came out on the weekend. I wasn't even completely aware that I was going to be reaching the end in that episode. So it's definitely a shorter book than Killer on a White Horse, but it is a YouTube exclusive, only available in audiobook format. And what happened was, last year I was writing a sequel to Killer on a White Horse, like a full novel-length presentation, and I loved the first 52 pages of the novel, but everything after that was something that I just wanted to redo. I wanted to recreate, and I was thinking about going back to square one and just restarting the entire novel for White Horse Strong, but then I thought, I really do like the story of the first 52 pages, so I decided to release that on YouTube as an audiobook, YouTube exclusive. You can follow all of that here on Black Box Online Radio, and I just have to share something on a personal note. I wanted to put these things out as audiobooks because I wasn't completely satisfied with the presentation of Killer on a White Horse as a paperback, and the same thing was true of Down the Dark Lane, which included the Barry Albert tapes, so I decided to just convert them into audiobooks, and now they're only available on YouTube, not even on Amazon anymore. But with White Horse Strong as an audiobook, that one I think came out the best. And I know I'm the person who creates that stuff, but there's still a few imperfections in Killer on a White Horse, still a few imperfections in Down the Dark Lane, but with White Horse Strong, I think it was the most solid audiobook that I've created, and there will be a little bit of a hiatus in the White Horse Killer saga, and the only reason is, I actually have to write the fourth book, and I know exactly what I'm going to say. I know absolutely every word is already in place. It's already been written in my mind. I just have to put it all down on paper, and then the White Horse Killer saga will be coming back. But I had something to share with you guys about Prash's book, The Zodiac Killer, A Brief Investigation. And I said that it's a very quick-moving read. It's a short book, and 50% of it is just summarizing the facts of the case. And I said you could glaze over that, right? If you want a dense Zodiac Killer read, then I recommend The Allen Files by John Bowman, which I said last week was a set of photocopied documents, like it's the actual documents about Arthur Lee Allen, the prime suspect in the Zodiac Killer mystery. And last week I left off by talking to you guys about how Arthur Lee Allen was initiated into the Golden Dragons in the Navy for being in a submersible at 100 feet, going at a certain speed and crossing a certain meridian line. Now, that's where I left off. As I said, this is a very dense read because you're just sort of sifting through military records and documents of all sorts, and they've all just been assembled in order, and a real credit to John Bowman. But I was reading this, and then the next thing after the Golden Dragons is, why don't I just talk about this chronologically? That happened in April of 1957, and then 1 month later, in May of 1957, Arthur Lee Allen is determined to be unfit for submarine duty. I mean, it seems like, wow, this guy's actually kind of doing well in the Navy. I mean, firstly, he's initiated into the Golden Dragons. Then he gets the China Service Medal. Then he is unfit for submarine duty due to emotional reasons, due to the inability to adapt to the submarines in an emotional way. And I was like, what on earth does that mean? Are you wondering what that means? Like, what on earth happened? I mean, in terms of context, I'm just reading these documents like anybody else, and there's not like a backstory that's provided for them, but something must have happened. So he's emotionally unfit for those duties, and he is also given this recommendation that he will never do submarine duty again. He will never return to anything involving the submersibles again. And again, I'm just thinking, well, what did he do? Like, what happened that would have triggered all of those events? And that just most likely shows that Arthur Lee Allen was dealing with some types of mental instability. And I think that, I mean, when I say mental instability, I mean he had perhaps some issues with his own emotions, because Arthur Lee Allen is somebody whom is going to go on to become a real life sex offender. He was definitely a twisted individual, and I was even once stating that I didn't think that he was a sociopath. I thought he was a narcissist, but maybe not sociopathic, and giving a shout out to Tony Daniele, who wrote a very convincing piece in response to my comments on Black Box Online Radio, which more or less pointed everything in the opposite direction. It was like, no, Arthur Lee Allen was a complete sociopath for all of these reasons. I mean, he was a fake, he was a liar, he was like a cheater, he was someone who showed indifference to human life by molesting minors. He was also somebody who was claimed like he liked being around animals, but if you watch the video of him and the dog didn't like being around him because it could sense something was wrong with him, all kinds of things. And it was a convincing piece, and perhaps I have to admit that I was wrong and just state that, yes, Arthur Lee Allen was a sociopathic individual, or no matter what, he had sociopathic tendencies. The next thing that I would like to talk to you about on Black Box Online Radio is going to tie into a different Zodiac killer suspect named Richard Gaikowski, but it's going to come about in somewhat of a roundabout way, giving a shout out to Andrew WVA, who is a longtime follower of Black Box Online Radio, also coming to you from West Virginia. Andrew WVA, that is. And he says, "Hello, Ned. Not too long ago, I read a very interesting book by author Susan M. Guy titled The Moonlight Mill Murders. A mysterious individual, nicknamed the Phantom Killer, shot and killed an employee of the Wheeling Steel Mill in Steubenville, Ohio in 1934. The killer struck again in a second attack, this time fatally shooting 2 more workers. In a third attack, another mill employee was severely wounded but survived. Eyewitness reports of the perpetrator described him as short and stocky, with an odd gorilla-like way of walking. The man was eventually caught by security guards and identified as David Dasco, an Italian immigrant who did custodial work at the mill. Dasco did perfectly fit the killer's description. He was short and stocky and walked with a waddling side-to-side gait. There was a pawn shop located outside of the steel mill, and the owner sold a gun to a man a couple of months prior to the shootings. The owner was brought to the jail, and detectives had Dasco walk back and forth in his cell. The shop owner was then able to identify Mr. Dasco as the man who had purchased the gun. When reading these details, it instantly reminded me of the eyewitness reports of the Zodiac and his walking style. Officer Falk described the Zodiac with a shuffling gait, loping gait, and a dentist named Dr. Rayfield described a similar individual at Lake Berryessa. Zodiac researcher Richard Grinnell included some of Dr. Rayfield's comments on his website, zodiacciphers.com. He wasn't nimble when he was walking, and when he turned to walk away, he wasn't like a smooth, athletic person. To me, he seemed like he was a little overweight and on the clumsier side. In the comments section of one of your BBOR podcasts, an individual named JM described encountering Richard Gaikowski at the Roxy Theater in the mid-1990s. He described Gaikowski as having a bulky upper body, large head, and favoring his right leg. JM is 6 feet 3 inches tall, and judged Richard Gaikowski to be around 5'11". When I asked for further clarification about favoring one leg, JM stated that Richard was shuffling to the right, like one leg was shorter than the other. He also compared Richard's build to the Tasmanian Devil cartoon character. Yes, you heard that right. These observations do not prove that Richard Gaikowski was the Zodiac, but I think it is very intriguing that Richard appears to share an unusual characteristic with the person observed at Lake Berryessa by Dr. Rayfield and the man seen by Officer Falk. Thank you and keep up the great work, Andrew. So what I believe Andrew is trying to say is that it appears that someone can be identified because of the way they are walking. Somebody can be identified because of a shuffling gait, a loping gait. Someone has something odd in their step, or they're favoring one leg more than the other. Those types of things can be recognizable. But first, I was not even aware that there was another set of moonlight murders, and there was another Phantom Killer. The more famous Phantom Killer operated in 46 in the town of Texarkana, and those are also called the Moonlight Murders, but they are the Texarkana Moonlight Murders, and these are the ones that took place in Ohio, the Moonlight Mill Murders, and I would love to read this book by Susan M. Guy talking about the Phantom Killer of Ohio. But this also goes to show you that one day, when they actually catch the killer, whether it's the Phantom Killer or the Zodiac, or even Jack the Ripper, a lot of people are just going to be like, oh, well, that's the killer, it's just some type of ordinary guy, like the custodian at the mill. That's the guy who was responsible for these crimes, and this person is hardly a criminal mastermind, just somebody who was dealing with some issues. And that is perhaps the way I can describe the Moonlight Mill murderer. With the Zodiac Killer, it is all still a mystery. But because I've been talking about other true crime cases on Black Box Online Radio, I also want to share something about how there was a YouTube short that came out recently talking about the Woodland Rapist from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And the Woodland Rapist was somebody whom they were able to catch and identify because of DNA. Genetic genealogical testing revealed that the Woodland Rapist was indeed an individual named Richard Neal. But the reason why I'm sharing this with you guys on Zodiac Monday is we're talking about witness identification. And I personally think that the composite sketches of the Woodland Rapist that were drawn before his identification via DNA testing were extremely accurate. Maybe not perfect, but very accurate. So some people might actually be very good at recalling details about the killer's appearance. And even you have certain aspects of the way that the killer is walking that could be used to identify the killer in the future. And when I've looked at full-length, full-body photos of Richard Gaikowski, I know what Andrew's talking about. I completely agree with what Andrew's talking about how he has that type of odd body type, where he's definitely going to be putting more, his center of gravity being more focused on his chest, so to speak, and this thing about favoring one leg over the other, that wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility for somebody like Richard Gaikowski. But, I mean, I think that the story of the Mill murders, where someone is able to identify the perpetrator just by their steps, is very valuable, partnered with the fact that composite sketches can be helpful when it comes to identifying true crime cases. But in terms of the Zodiac Killer, it's hard. It really is hard. Because the issue with the Woodland Rapist killer is that, or the Woodland Rapist molester, actually, the Woodland Rapist was a serial predator, but not a serial killer. With this person, they're much more confrontational. They're much more up close with the Woodland Rapist. And with the Zodiac, everybody is looking at the Zodiac from a distance. Either that, or it's just for a very, very short amount of time. Now, I told you guys I've been talking about D.B. Cooper on Fridays, and I think that the Cooper sketches are accurate. I mean, there are multiple composite sketches of D.B. Cooper, and I think that at least one of them is going to be mostly spot on. And the reason why is because they had the opportunity to spend hours with D.B. Cooper on the plane back in 1971. Did anything like that happen with the Zodiac Killer? Mostly no, except that the Kathleen Johns incident occurred on March 22nd of 1970, and she spent an extended amount of time with the Zodiac Killer. But as far as she stated, just that the guy looked exactly like the Zodiac Killer's composite sketch, and I don't think that the Kathleen Johns incident is credible. I've been very clear about that from the start. I don't believe that happened. I don't think the Zodiac Killer committed that crime. And I'm not even sure if there was a real abduction, and I would hate to say that about someone and act like they're making it up, but that's where my instincts are pointing. So I want to turn this over to you guys and ask this as a challenge question. Do you believe that the Zodiac Killer composite sketches could be accurate? And we not only have the ones after the Stein murder, but also the Lake Area Savoyer sketch. And the second one would be, do you think that somebody would be able to remember the exact way that the Zodiac Killer was walking if he were leaving and walking away? Do you think that people can remember those types of details with extreme accuracy? And the final thing that I would like to share with you guys comes to us from Melissa Rose Tappa. She is the webmaster of ZodiacKillerBomb.com, and she has something about Keith Jesperson, the Happy Face Killer. And she says, Hi, Ned. In our last interview, I mentioned the truck driver in the Northwest who got away with his early killings because two other people falsely confessed and were convicted. This allowed his activity to continue until he started writing letters and was finally caught. His name was Keith Jesperson. There might be some comparisons to draw from the Snoozy and Furlong murders in San Jose. Melissa Moore is the daughter of Keith Jesperson, who was a notorious serial killer known as the Happy Face Killer, because he sent taunting letters with smiley faces to the media and authorities during his killing spree. Not sure if you've done a story on him yet, but I'd sure like to hear one since I came across his name again. Hope things are well. And thank you so much to Melissa, once again from ZodiacKillerBomb.com, and her Zodiac suspect is Loring Dale Hill. I've had the opportunity to interview Melissa multiple times, and you can check out those interviews here on Black Box Online Radio. I've also talked about LD Hill on other Zodiac Killer news reports. But in this one, let's look at this stuff right here. Firstly, Keith Jesperson, the Happy Face Killer. Not the Smiley Face Killers, that's a different story, but the Happy Face Killer. This just goes to show that there's another example of a cryptic serial killer who is writing letters, taking credit for his crimes, giving these types of taunts. And some people might make it seem like it's so weird and bizarre for a killer to leave these taunting messages or even making the phone calls. I've talked to you guys about so many examples about how this happens way more frequently than people think. I've talked about this on Zodiac Monday all the time. Keith Jesperson is just another clear case of this. And it's my understanding of the Happy Face Killer that when Melissa says that there were people who falsely confessed, it was actually a woman who made the first confession, and she said that her and her quote-unquote lover at the time were responsible for the crimes, and that really the guy committed them, and that she is more or less the accomplice. And it turned out to be a purely bogus confession, but she still ended up going to jail anyway. And it seemed like a plan where she was trying to vilify the guy, but it all just backfired, and she got sent to prison as well. But then this guy, Keith Jesperson, wrote a message on a truck stop wall where he was taking credit for the crimes, and people still didn't really notice or connect the dots. So then he started writing letters where he was taking credit for the murders, and he signed them with a happy face. That's why he became known as the Happy Face Killer. But as far as this example of the Snoozy and Furlong murders, they are a possible Zodiac Killer crime that took place in 1969, the murders of Kathy Snoozy and Deborah Furlong, who were stabbed viciously. One victim was stabbed 200 times, another victim was stabbed over 300 times, over 200 times. One was stabbed over 100 times, meaning 300 times in total. Very, very vicious crime. And there was a confession that was made by an individual named Carl F. Warner, and he also ended up confessing to the murder of Kathy Billick, or was convicted of it anyway. And as far as what Melissa is trying to say is, I believe she's trying to draw some comparisons on how sometimes people confess to crimes that they didn't commit. Sometimes people admit to things that they did not do. And she's not the first person to talk about this. Some people to this day believe that the Zodiac Killer was responsible for the Snoozy and Furlong murders, and just they convicted somebody else for it. And he's just thinking, oh, well, that person got away. That person got nailed for the crime. Therefore, I got away with that one. Something to that effect. And this could all tie back into what Prash was saying about the murder of Sherry Jo Bates. Vicious crime committed by knife. This person was somewhat closer to the victims in terms of social circles, so he didn't want to reveal details that only he and the police knew, because it would have come back to him in some way, somehow. But I really want to know, what do you guys think? Do you, how likely is it, do you think that some other person confessed to one of the Zodiac murders and is currently in jail for a Zodiac crime? That can be another challenge question. And I would love to do a larger feature on Keith Jesperson, the Happy Face Killer, because I know I'm giving him some very big nutshell versions, and I've never done an episode on him. And the last segment for Zodiac Monday is going to be talking about the new video that is out on David Oranchak's channel, Let's Crack the Zodiac, episode number 19. And this is one where David shared a lot of updates about everything that's happened since the year 2020, after David Oranchak, Carl Van Eyck, and Sam Blake solved the Zodiac Killer's 340 cipher. And he has been interviewed on a lot of different shows, a lot of different podcasts, and he has the links available on his YouTube channel. But David Oranchak also wanted to share some things that were a little bit more personal, and that is that the prime researcher who has explored the life of Richard Gaikowski and brought all of this forward was Blaine Blaine. He is the person who was the informant known as Goldcatcher, who was more or less responsible for bringing Gaikowski into a lot of the Zodiac Killer discussions as a suspect, and Blaine has since passed away. But before Blaine passed away, he sent a couple hundred pages of information to David Oranchak, and David asked a challenge question to the listeners of his program on Let's Crack the Zodiac about what should he do with them, because when Blaine mailed them to David, he said that he did not want an episode made about them or didn't want a show made about them, and David asked the audience, well, now that Blaine has passed away, what should he do with Blaine's life's work? And as I understand from the video, it's mostly about the possible solutions to the Z32 cipher, and that's why Blaine chose to mail them to David Oranchak. And my response would be, publish them, share them, give commentary on them, bring them to the light, because Richard Gaikowski has passed away. He passed away in 2004 because of cancer. Blaine has also passed away. The key players in that story are no longer alive, and I mean, he's in the possession of some things that are relevant to the Zodiac Killer case. At this point, I think it would be totally fair and reasonable to share them, unless he had a very, very good reason not to, but ultimately, if Blaine didn't want them shared during his lifetime, now I think would be an acceptable time. But what do you guys think about that? And are you curious about what Blaine has observed about the Z32 cipher? And those were other things that David Oranchak was talking about in his video when he said that people frequently contact him about the Z13 cipher and the Z32 cipher. The Zodiac Killer had 4 confirmed ciphers. The Z408 has been solved and the Z340 has been solved. But with the Z13 and the Z32, people send their solutions to David Oranchak, and his public response was that there's no way for him to verify them. He appreciates a lot of the creativity that people have used in their attempts to solve the Z13 and the Z32, but with such few characters, with so few characters in the ciphers, it's impossible for him to just say, yep, that's exactly what the Zodiac Killer was thinking. That is the right solution. The Z13, of course, has 13 characters, and with the Z32, there is a very small amount of them that repeat. There is a very few amount of the characters that repeat. For example, it's only the letter C, the letter O, and the triangle, which could be the delta sign, and that's pretty much it. So, I mean, I'm glad he said that, because people have even contacted me and they've asked me, can you pass my information on to David Oranchak? I mean, I've tried to contact him so many times. I want him to verify my solution. And that's the way that people promote their findings. That's the way that people approach the situation. They say, I want him to verify this. I want him to certify this. And just to say that they have solved the Z13 or the Z32. And I've never truly sent anyone, sent him anyone's solution, but for the same reason. Firstly, I mean, you can contact him in your own way, but he has openly made a public statement that he is someone who has followed the Zodiac ciphers for decades, but he is not able to just say, yep, that's the correct solution. So I think that it's not the most effective approach. But what do you guys think about that challenge question about what to do with Blaine's several hundred pages of Zodiac Killer writings that he sent to David Oranchak? Should it be revealed or should it be kept private? Please put your ideas in the comment section down below, as well as responding to any of the other challenge questions. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there was always BlackBoxNid88 over on Instagram. And I will see you over there. Goodbye.